look, another remake. My second remake of a previous countdown this year. Gee, if people didn't already think I was a Fawful's Minion ripoff, they certainly do now. I swear I'm not running out of ideas, guys. I just felt like redoing this topic. After all, it's been 3 years since I made the original version of this list, and in that time, I've played plenty of games, and my opinions have definitely changed. As such, this list is going to look pretty different from the original. There will be a few returning contenders on this list, but most of them are brand new. I just realized I made it through this entire intro sequence without even mentioning what I'm talking about. Villains. It's my favorite video game villains, as you clearly saw in the title. I could go into more detail, but I'm assuming you know what a villain is. It would be pretty weird if you didn't know that. There's no special criteria, it's just my favorites. Same rules as always. One per franchise and only games I've played. Also, since I'm talking about the villain's actions throughout the game, there will be spoilers on this list. No worries, I'll warn you whenever they're coming up. With all that said, let's begin.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
One thing the world's been inundated with to the point of insanity in the past couple years is the minions. They were kind of charming at first, but through sheer overexposure, they've driven many an internet critic insane. Here's a little question for you. Have you ever wanted to see a better version of the minions? Ones that are both funnier and who haven't been plastered everywhere to the point of making Frozen's proliferation of pop culture seem tame by comparison? I really hope you answered yes to that question, otherwise this entry's about to get real awkward. The reason I spent so long talking about minions is because I think that the Inkt Corporation from Blob bears some heavy similarities to them personality-wise. They get into the same kind of slapstick antics you would expect the minions to get up to, but here's the big difference. With the minions, yeah, canonically in the Despicable Me movies, they're supposed to be evil, but they act so innocent that a lot of people tend to forget that. With the Inkt Corporation, yeah, they're goofy and funny, but there's still no mistaking it. They are bad guys. Instead of being childlike and innocent like the minions, the Inkies are aggressive and hostile, which I think makes them a lot funnier. In fact, whenever they're in power, it bears a striking resemblance to real-world dictatorships. Well, at least to the extent that they can get away with it in an E-rated game. And I've gone this long without even mentioning the best part of the Inkt Corporation, their leader, Comrade Black. A villain I like so much, I had him in my intro back when I still had an intro. Hey look, there was a time when it was considered common practice to have 40-second long countdown intros. That doesn't mean it was smart, it just means that was a thing that happened at one point. But anyway, Comrade Black. This guy definitely does have his goofy moments, just like the regular Inkies, but he can be surprisingly intimidating at times. Not only is he constantly coming up with new types of Inkies to counter Blob's strengths, but he also changes up his tactics in the second game. In the first game, he just simply does a hostile takeover. In the second game, though, he disguises himself as a cult leader, builds up his numbers that way, then he runs for office and rigs the election so he wins. And that's how he takes power. In fact, his time as a cult leader was probably just a distraction so no one would notice the massive influx of Inkies closing in on the city. Overall, while I don't really think of the Blob games as anything that special, the Inkt Corporation is the one element that I think really goes above and beyond.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
You know, when you think about it, what is the basic purpose of a villain in a video game? For the most part, it's someone that you defeat by the end of the game. Now, there's plenty of ways to make a great video game villain, but just in terms of being someone satisfying to take down, I can't think of anyone who fills that role better than Dusan Nemec. You see, in the world of Watch Dogs 2, there's plenty of different companies and other organizations that manipulate people's data in the scummiest ways imaginable. And Dusan is basically the kingpin of them in San Francisco. He's a top executive at a cybersecurity company, and he's been doing a lot of illegal stuff with people's data, and giving plenty of others the tools to do so as well. Granted, not all of it's illegal, but the stuff that is legal is still pretty dang terrible. Not to mention, he is just the right amount of unlikable to make him the perfect villain for this type of game. Just to give you a bit of perspective, he's a smug San Francisco tech executive with a man bun. I don't think I need to say much more. Not to mention, he's scarily competent as well. Everyone else who's using his technology have no clue what they're doing and are pretty easy targets for DedSec. But whenever Dusan himself gets directly involved, he's able to stay one step ahead of them. Not only does he give DedSec a bunch of fake followers just to lure Marcus over to Invite so we can talk down to him and have him arrested, but when the FBI manages to arrest Wrench, they were only able to do so because of Dusan. And when he actually shows up, it's clear that he's the one in control there, not the FBI. Heck, he even meets up with Marcus on the beach at the beginning of the game, and none of the DedSec members there even realize that their main enemy's right in front of them. What else can I say? Throughout the whole game, it feels like you're in a giant chess match fueled by data and public opinion up against a guy who thinks he can't lose. So you better believe it's awesome when he does.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
You know, Undertale is a game that messes with a lot of the typical conventions in RPGs. I went over this a good deal in Top 10 Video Game Beginnings, so you can check that out if you want. But what I'm here to talk about today is the villain. Now, given how widespread Undertale is now, you probably already know who this is, but going back to when the game first came out, would you really have expected the literal first character you meet in the game to be the main antagonist? I certainly didn't expect it. Undertale is a game all about mercy and finding the best in the worst of people. And Flowey certainly is the worst. While everyone else in the game has a legitimate reason for coming after you, Flowey just likes killing. His whole view on the world is it's kill or be killed. Flowey's actually a pretty disturbing villain, mainly due to the fact that he can break the fourth wall pretty easily. If you kill Toriel, then reset and spare her, Flowey will still know what you did. And in the boss fight with him, he flat out crashes the game and manipulates your save file. Also, he's the only boss who's in color. And what the heck am I even looking at here? Not only is he enjoyable to watch going fully off the rails with his insane facial expressions, but when you actually decide to start taking his advice, that's when things really get creepy. Flowey tells you exactly why he started to enjoy killing people, and it's the exact same reason you're probably going down that run. He'd seen the happy outcome so many times that he got bored of it, and out of sheer morbid curiosity, wanted to see what would happen if he killed everyone. Really, he's the ultimate symbol of which route you go down. Can you be so merciful that you'll even spare someone this horrible? Or can you go down his path to such an extreme that even he's terrified of you? Or do you take the middle route and see this horrific abomination? The choice is yours. Choose wisely. Well, actually, you can't really do the true pacifist ending on your first playthrough, so choose wisely to the extent of choices you have. Damn technicalities.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
You know, there was one game that I wanted to make sure I played before I remade this list. That game is Far Cry 3, and for any of you who've played it, you know exactly why. The man, the myth, the legend himself, Vaas Montenegro. Vaas is one of the craziest video game characters I've ever seen, but simply calling him insane doesn't quite do him justice. He's mesmerizingly insane. It's kind of hard to describe really, but I'll do my best. In any scene he's talking, he either sounds like he's about to snap or he's currently doing so. He can go from a big philosophical tangent to just talking casually and then back again. His quote about the definition of insanity is so iconic that it's literally a t-shirt. This guy is absolutely amazing to watch, and he steals every scene that he's in. So why is he so low on the list? The reason why is very simple, really. There aren't that many scenes he's in. There's only 4 of them. Now, why is this exactly? Is it that Far Cry 3 is a really short game? No, it's due to the fact that Vaas isn't actually the main villain. He gets killed off halfway through the game in order to make room for the real villain. The true villain of this game is Hoyt Volka, and he is, well, I'll play a couple clips of them back to back so you can see for yourself who's more interesting.
Jason Brody, whatever your name is, slipped my mind. How stupid do you think I am?
You're my bitch. I rule this fucking kingdom. Shut the fuck up, or you die. What is it, Jason? Jason, what is it? Why aren't you laughing now like you did up there? What, is this not fun anymore? Have I failed to entertain you?
See, I prefer the European recordings. The brass sections in American orchestras are too bombastic.
Fucking loved ones! They come and they blindside you every fucking time. So they say to me, they say, Vaas, who the fuck is it going to be? Them or me? Me or them? like, you know, like they fucking think that I need to make a fucking choice. By the way, this lighter really sucks.
This is a global enterprise. Globalization is the future. Bringing things from far away to me.
And then I started seeing it everywhere I looked. Everywhere I looked, all these fucking pricks. Everywhere I looked, doing the exact same fucking thing. Over and over and over and over and over again. Thinking, this time, it's gonna be different. No, please. This time, it's gonna be different. I'm sorry. I don't like the way you are looking at it. Okay?
I don't see what they're talking about. Why would I want an endlessly entertaining Pirate King when I could have a guy in a suit yammering on about globalization? Although to be fair, monologuing oligarchs don't always make for bad villains. I think you know where I'm going with this.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
You know, the villains on this list have varying degrees of notoriety. However, this one right here is probably the most well-known out of all of them. Andrew Ryan. Not only is Andrew Ryan a great villain, but he's also a large chunk of what makes Bioshock so great to begin with. Andrew Ryan was a wealthy businessman who ran into the same problem that a lot of American oligarchs have. He didn't want to pay his taxes. However, instead of flooding the political system with cash in order to bend the government to his will like most people in his position would do, he took the mature route and instead used that money to build himself a city on the bottom of the ocean where he can rule and do whatever the heck he wants. Okay, as much as I am making fun of him, he was a true believer in libertarianism, and Rapture was his vision of a glorious city unrestricted by government regulation. And at first, it worked. Brilliant minds from all around the world flooded in order to continue whatever their pursuits were, unburdened by the regulations of their respective countries. Things were great for a while, but eventually Ryan's philosophy caught up to him, mainly because of a drug called Adam that, despite Ryan knowing the extreme dangers of, refused to regulate it because that would go against everything Rapture was supposed to stand for. And by the time you make it to Rapture, the city's falling apart, just about everyone's gone completely insane, and Ryan's not that far behind them. He's quite the intimidating force considering the fact that, well, he does control the entire city, but beyond that, he frequently goes into philosophical monologues about what he believes in, and it's quite captivating. But despite all the intimidation behind him, there's the fact that this is his life's dream, and it's fallen apart. His grand philosophy that he constantly talks about failed, and he can't admit that to himself. In other words, Andrew Ryan definitely is an intimidating villain, as well as a really interesting one to watch, but he's also pretty tragic too. My only issue with Andrew Ryan is, like Vaas, he gets killed significantly before the end of the game, which is a real shame. The rest of the game is a lot less enjoyable without his intimidating presence in it.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
You know, talking about a villain in This Is the Police is quite the interesting prospect. This is mainly because the game's main setting, Freeburg, is an incredibly crime and corruption infested city, and our main character, Jack Boyd, is a man who's about to lose his job and his entire life's falling apart. Despite all this though, the game does have two pretty clear antagonists, Mayor Rogers and Robespierre, both of whom are incredibly power-hungry people and are willing to do plenty of morally reprehensible things in order to get/keep that power. To the point where at the end of the game, both of them try to hire Jack to kill the other one and then immediately stab him in the back. Despite their similarities though, the choice here was pretty easy. I'm gonna go with Robespierre. With Mayor Rogers, all you really need to know is that he's the mayor, and imagine every horrible, awful, disgusting abuse of power that someone in that position could pull off, and he's probably done it. Robespierre, or going by his actual name, Eugene Chafee, is probably worse, but he's so much more interesting. Just looking at the nickname he's taken, he definitely bills himself as a revolutionary figure. He constantly talks about the corruption and brutality of Freiburg and Mayor Rogers, but at the same time, it's clear that he's not any better. I mean, halfway through the game, he sicks a serial killer on the town just to silence some people who are of no use to him anymore and give Jack some glory points. So yeah, this guy's done a bunch of terrible things, but whenever he does it, he can always just say that it's part of the nature of Freiburg and point to Mayor Rogers as being even worse. And even then, you don't really know the full nature of either of their crimes, so you never really know which one of them's worse. Really, the differences are clear. Whenever Rogers is on screen, he's just kind of a jerk. Whenever Chafee's on screen, he's giving some really interesting philosophical tangent about something random and how it ties into the nature of Freiburg. Their strategies for keeping power, Rogers simply just abuses his authority as mayor and holds Jack's job over his head. With Chafee, you can tell he's constantly making moves behind the scenes, and he is unpredictable, but it all makes sense by the end of the game. And even then, some of it's left up to interpretation. I have a video where I theorize that he killed Martin Stett, but at the same time, we have literally no way of knowing. You never really know what this man's capable of. Will he be an improvement from the status quo, or something far worse?
Did I ever tell you?
The definition of insanity.
That moment when you put a villain on a list because they're permanently linked to you because you put them in your username for some reason. I am of course talking about Fawful. Yeah, for those of you who didn't know, I was obsessed with Fawful when I came up with his username. Am I still? No! I mean, wouldn't he be #1 if I was? But just because I don't have the same love for Fawful that I did back when I was 13, doesn't mean I don't think he's a great villain. I mean, he's on this list, isn't he? Let's start with the most obvious thing to talk about with Fawful, his speech pattern. Fawful talks in such a weird yet hilarious way that virtually every quote from him is special in its own right. I would have said memorable, but considering how much screen time this guy has, there's no way you're going to remember every single awesome line that he spews. So yeah, this guy's a joy to watch whenever he opens his mouth. However, that's not the only good thing about him. Because despite how hilarious he is not a joke villain. He actually manages to get quite a lot accomplished. He started off as Cacletta's right-hand man and arguably pulled more weight than she did. I mean, she becomes super powerful when she possesses Bowser midway through the game, but the only reason she was able to do that was because of Fawful. I mean, if it weren't for him, the game would have just ended halfway through. So yeah, if it weren't for Fawful, Superstar Saga would have actually been a lot shorter than it was. And Fawful realizes this, and even talks about betraying Cacletta, but before he gets the chance, Luigi knocks him out the window. And that's the end of Wait a minute, no it's not. Not only does he appear as a shopkeeper in Partners in Time, but he's the main villain of Bowser's Inside Story. So what does he do in Bowser's Inside Story? Well, he gets Bowser to inhale anyone important in the Mushroom Kingdom who could stop him, takes over Bowser's castle, turns it into a theater, and brainwashes most of his minions, takes over Peach's castle and makes that his base of operations, and manages to find and unleash the Dark Star. So yeah, pretty good plan, and he certainly had the technology to pull it off. And here's the thing about Fawful in Bowser's Inside Story. Sure, he's still hilarious, but he also has a pretty intimidating vibe too. I mean, he basically took over the entire Mushroom Kingdom. He's the one with all the power, and he is not one to be messed with. He's one step ahead of you for most of the game, and laughing with that huge grin on his face the whole way through. I do still find it kind of disappointing that at the end of the game, he gets overshadowed by a generic evil clone, but even then, he is still part of the final battle, and it's not like there was a noticeable lack of Fawful throughout the rest of the game or anything. Not a bad villain to have tied to my username.
Did I ever tell you?
The definition of insanity.
You know, on my original list, I put GLaDOS up at the top, but when you think about it, is she really the main villain of Portal? I mean, yeah, she's definitely the villain in the first game, but halfway through the second game, she actually starts to become nicer and teams up with you to defeat Wheatley. So does that make Wheatley the true villain? No, because he only turns on you halfway through, and he had no intention of doing so beforehand. It's almost as if he was corrupted by the system. And when you eliminate those two, all that really leaves is Cave Johnson, but he can't be the villain. Look at all this funny, charming dialogue he has.
When life gives you lemons, don't make lemonade. Make life take the lemons back. Get mad! I don't want your damn lemons! What am I supposed to do with these? Demand to see life's manager. Make life rue the day it thought it could give Cave Johnson lemons. Do you know who I am? I'm the man who's gonna burn your house down with the lemons. I'm gonna get my engineers to invent a combustible lemon that burns your house down.
You know, on second thought, I'm starting to think this guy might be the villain. I mean, I didn't really notice it at first, but when you think about it, Cave Johnson's responsible for pretty much all the horrible stuff that happens in the Portal games. Let's start this off with a simple word: safety. To most people, it's the state of being protected from harm. For Aperture Science employees, it was likely just a 6-letter word that would get you fired if you brought it up to the boss.
Science isn't about why, it's about why not. Why is so much of our science dangerous? Why not marry safe science if you love it so much? In fact, why not invent a special safety door that won't hit you on the butt on the way out because you are fired?
It's made pretty dang clear through Cave Johnson's pre-recorded messages that his mentality was just to try any random insane idea that popped into his head and not once think about the consequences for any of the test subjects. Everything from the Mantis Men to the control group for the repulsion gel to this.
If you've cut yourself at all in the course of these tests, you might have noticed that your blood is pure gasoline. That's normal. We've been shooting you with an invisible laser that's supposed to turn blood into gasoline, so all that means is it's working.
All of it reeks of a blatant disregard for the safety of the test subjects. And why should Cave care? It's made pretty clear through his pre-recorded messages that most of the subjects are homeless, so it's not like they can fight back or anything. All of this, while hilarious, is pretty screwed up. But this blatant disregard for safety does catch up to Cave Johnson and later Aperture itself. It's made pretty obvious that Cave Johnson died because he was poisoned by the moon rocks that Aperture took in order to make their portals. As for Aperture itself, well, one of Cave Johnson's last ideas before he dies is uploading someone's consciousness onto a computer. He originally wanted it done to him, but since it became clear that the technology wasn't going to be there until after he died, he wanted it done to his assistant Carolyn instead. Now, was Carolyn on board with this? Well, there's no indication in the game, but there was originally meant to be a pre-recorded message about this subject. The reason it didn't make it in, granted I don't know for sure, but from what I've heard, it's because Cave Johnson's voice actor wasn't exactly comfortable recording the lines, saying it sounded too much like rape. But even if Carolyn was on board, it still wouldn't have been a good idea, because what are some of the consequences of Carolyn becoming GLaDOS? Well, she eventually forgets who she was, develops an addiction to testing, which we later see Wheatley grappling with, and, oh yeah, she floods the enrichment center with neurotoxin, killing all the scientists. You know, it's funny, in both the original and at the beginning of Portal 2, GLaDOS killing everyone is portrayed as a bad thing, for kind of obvious reasons. But when you learn the full context, you start to realize that the destruction of Aperture might have been for the best. I think Cave Johnson's a great villain, both because he's hilarious, but also because that hilarity kind of distracts you from the truth. You get so wrapped up in his escapades about combustible lemons and mantis men that you don't really realize that he is the true villain of the series. Everything bad that's happened in Aperture, including all the stuff that Wheatley and GLaDOS have done, can be traced back to Cave's total and complete disregard for any safety precautions whatsoever.
Did I ever tell you the definition of insanity?
You know, on this list, I've complained a couple times about swapping out the villain midway through the game. Now, I don't hate this trope across the board. I only have a problem with it when you're switching out a really entertaining villain for one that's not nearly as interesting. However, when you're doing it in reverse, that's something I can get behind. The reason I bring this up is that I'm about to talk about Kid Icarus Uprising. For the first 9 chapters of the game, the main villain is Medusa, who's a good villain. She's not going to be winning any awards anytime soon, but she's perfectly serviceable. But after you defeat her, it turns out that she wasn't the main villain this whole time. Hades was, and the game's not even close to being over yet. And let me just say, it's a pretty good introduction to your twist villain when you have them literally tear through the credits. I think one of the best ways to describe Hades is a massive troll. He's not hell-bent on completing some sort of evil objective. He already has everything he wants. Just about all his dialogue in the game is him messing with you. He has so many memorable moments, from trying to justify eating souls to Pit, to telling an obviously fake story about what he would use the wish seed for, to when freaky aliens hand you lemons, make freaky alien lemonade. He causes tons of destruction worldwide and has such a nonchalant attitude about it throughout the entire game that he doesn't even take it seriously when Pit shows up to fight him. Plain and simple, Hades is hilarious. Even when he's revealing some of the most screwed up stuff he's been doing throughout the game, he still manages to make it funny. And in a game like Kid Icarus Uprising that almost never takes itself seriously, that's exactly the kind of villain you would want. Really, the only complaint I can think of with Hades is the fact that he's so good, he overshadows a lot of the other really good villains in Kid Icarus Uprising. And when that's the biggest complaint I can think of, you know you're dealing with a good villain.
Did I ever tell you
The definition of insanity.
You know, now that we're at number 1, there's something I'd like to say about not just video game villains, but villains in general. When it comes to my personal preferences, I like villains that are really intimidating. I also like villains that are hilarious. But above all else, I like villains that are both. As you would guess by me bringing this up now, number 1 on this list does a great job of blending both these aspects. And to think, my favorite villain in gaming is a murderous animatronic teddy bear. No, wrong one. I know it's weird that you have multiple options with a description like that, but I think my big point at the beginning of this entry should have pointed you towards the other one. That's right, if you haven't guessed by this point, my favorite villain in gaming is Monokuma from the Danganronpa games. Now, for those of you who never heard of Danganronpa, you might be looking at him and thinking, what, he's just a teddy bear, what harm can he possibly do? Well, he traps a bunch of teenagers inside of a high school, or in Danganronpa 2's case, a deserted island, and won't let any of them leave until they start killing each other. But it's not just a simple bloodbath. Oh no, that would be too easy. Once a murder occurs, there's an investigation period and then a class trial. If the killer's found out, they get brutally executed. If they're not found out, then they get to go free and everyone else dies. So yeah, that's quite the brutal setup, but that's before you even get into the motives. You see, the promise of escape isn't really enough to get these people to kill each other, so Monokuma constantly throws motives into the mix. They can be as mild as offering a large sum of money, or installing an arcade cabinet that details past events, to as brutal as threatening the loved ones of everyone involved, or locking everyone in a funhouse with no food in it and not letting them out until another murder occurs. However, despite how brutal this guy is, he's also freaking hilarious. I mean, for starters, it's a freaking teddy bear that's doing all this horrible stuff. But beyond that, it's clear that this is just a game to him. Despite how dire things are for everyone around him, he doesn't take any of it seriously and is constantly messing with people. And it's freaking hilarious. Whenever there's a transition to the next day, there's always a dream sequence where you see him saying something. Sometimes it's philosophical, sometimes it arguably predicts future events in the game, and oftentimes it's really funny. Even the incredibly brutal execution sequences are super over the top and do have a sense of humor about them. And I think that's a really good segue into why Monokuma works so well. All the horrible stuff Monokuma's doing gives a much darker tinge to his jokes, making them funnier. Meanwhile, his laughy, jokey nature lures you into a false sense of security, so it hits you much harder whenever he does something incredibly screwed up. He really is the kind of guy who will make fun of you for getting an erection 1 minute and forge your best friend's suicide note the next. The interesting thing about Monokuma, though, is that he's not even real within the context of the games. Whenever he shows up, he's always being controlled by somebody, most notably Junko, who is a pretty good villain in her own right. I don't think I would have been able to take the idea of the main villain's goal being to spread despair everywhere seriously, unless it was someone as absolutely insane as she was. But despite just being a glorified mouthpiece, Monokuma really does does feel like his own character. He's essentially a symbol that took on an existence all his own, and I think that's pretty interesting. Not sure what else to say, really. He's really funny, really intimidating, and a big part of what makes Danganronpa such an enjoyable franchise. I'm Dafawfulizer, and I don't have an outro for this. I've kind of been going on for too long. Bye.